Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to give it the usual minute or so, just to let the last few people join. We can see the numbers are climbing. But first, obviously, thank you to everybody who has already joined for joining promptly. And in the usual fashion, before we really get going, can I just check for those who are already with us, can you hear me okay? And if you can, in your chat function or the question function, could you let me know? Wonderful, thank you everybody. Lots of yeses, loud and clear. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you everybody. It's always reassuring to know that the technology works. You are broadcasting. Okay, so no sound. So I can see that somebody's not getting any sound. I'm not sure we can do anything on our end. Hopefully that will be resolved for you, Janet. We'll just give it an extra 30 seconds. The numbers seem to be climbing, but thank you, everybody. Can hear loud and clear. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, hopefully blue skies and sunshine has reached everybody today. Certainly where I am in the south, it is beautifully blue skies. No sound problems. Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you, Janet. So hopefully, yes, the sun is shining upon us all. And it's quite timely because we have a fantastic webinar planned today, a really, really fantastic webinar, which we're very pleased to bring you. So I think the numbers have leveled off, so we are going to kickstart formally. So first off, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is all about the Senior Leader Apprenticeship Assessment Plan changes. So we are placing a focus on the actual assessment plan. And as you can see there in the subtitle, we are going to take a deep dive into the new assessment plan. So hold on. Now, the good news is that this session is being recorded. So you can sit back, relax, listen, take notes if you wish, but we will send the recording and also the slides to you promptly after the webinar. So feel free to just sit and listen and enjoy the information. What I will say is we do have a fair amount of information. As you can imagine, this is a level 7 standard, so there is a fair amount of detail to go into, but we have a great number of slides to go through. But be reassured, we've got a good plan. So moving forward, just into the agenda quickly. So we're going to quickly go through some introductions, then straight into the background, just a recap of some high-level changes, a reminder of the changes, and then straight into the assessment methods. But we will then finish with a summary on what support is available for all customers. And then most importantly, we will have a dedicated section at the end of the webinar for questions. So please do add your questions throughout the webinar into the question function. We will answer those at the end, and any questions we don't get to answer, we will add those into the FAQ bank of questions that we already have available. So we will add to those. So please be reassured that we will get to all the questions. So introductions. You've been listening to me, and my name is Joseph Valentine. I have the wonderful position to be the industry manager for ILM, and I'm very pleased to be joined by two wonderful colleagues, Jill Hanson and Jill Harper. Jill Hanson is our technical advisor. We'll be going through the majority of today's webinar, and we also will be joined later by Jill Harper, our development manager, who has been at the heart of this new development that we're bringing you today. So really pleased to be joined by both Jill with a J and Jill with a G. So thank you both for joining. So a very quick run through before I hand over to Jill. Obviously, support with any apprenticeship is crucial, and we have a fantastic team of specialists to support you throughout delivery, from the start all the way to the end. And what you can see here is really just a snapshot of what you can expect from ILM. And today we're going to actually focus on the first one there, so guidance on the process. So we have developed some very detailed guidance packs for both the provider and employer, but also for the apprentice. So we're going to be going through those today. But also throughout the apprenticeship journey, you will get support. And what you can see in the second is preparation to pass first time. So we are in the process of developing a bank of exemplar resources to help you really bring those assessment methods to life for your apprentices. So we will be bringing those to you in due course. But also, and fundamentally, we have a really strong caliber of expertise within our assessor pool of assessors, a real fantastic group of people with fantastic experience of leadership and management. And they really are a brilliant group of assessors. So you can be reassured that there is a very strong group there that constantly work together and standardize to ensure really strong assessment. And then at the end there, what's supported throughout the whole process is a team of EPA superstars, essentially, I like to see them as. They really are throughout the whole business, and some of those we're going to talk about at the end of the session, some of which you will have already been working with, and no doubt you will have been talking very regularly with Joe Bell, Julie Rowlett, who are our dedicated HEI partnership managers, and also Jill, who is our technical advisor, and also Karen Egan, who is also a technical advisor for leadership and management, amongst many other colleagues as well that we have available to support you throughout. So please be reassured that those people are there and will continue to be there to support you. So one final slide from me before I hand over to Jill. So just a quick recap of what has actually changed in the standard and the assessment plan. So, and the key thing I will just reiterate is that both the standard itself and the assessment plan have both changed. And because both have changed, that has then triggered a new funding band, which was approved on the 11th of January 2021. So what you can see on the second bullet point is that the new funding band is now £14,000, and that's including EPA. So that's the new funding band for the new senior leader apprenticeship. And that obviously is a reduction because the previous version, the senior leader master's degree apprenticeship, was £18,000. So it's really important that all customers, whether an employer or provider, are aware that obviously the funding has changed for the new version of the senior leader. And one of the main reasons for that reduction, amongst other reasons from the information that we have from iFate, is that there is no longer a mandated master's degree. That's one of the biggest changes that has occurred from the standard itself. So there's no longer the requirement to achieve a master's degree. But of course, as you will have seen from our communications, that there is still the possibility, an option for employers and providers to include a qualification of some sort, but obviously that then needs to be negotiated with the employer, etc. But the important date is the 29th of March, which was, of course, yesterday. So the new plan went live to new starts yesterday. Now, that means any new apprentice going on to the level 7 senior leader as of yesterday will need to be registered onto the new senior leader apprenticeship. And that's a really important date. So any new apprenticeship start going on to their ILR will be going on to the new senior leader apprenticeship. But of course, please be reassured that anyone who's currently on the previous version can still continue to go through their endpoint assessment as planned. So just to rattle through the last 4 points on this slide, within the standard, you will see occupational duties have been added. So these are new to the actual standard, and those occupational duties obviously follow through the whole apprenticeship assessment plan, which you will see today. Also as well, the knowledge, skills and behaviours have been broken down into more manageable statements. Oh, let's just drop that down. And also the apprenticeship is now 24 months, and the EPA, which is the change, is typically 5 months. So the EPA period is longer, and we will go into the detail of that today. There is also more emphasis on the role of the employer at Gateway and beyond. And again, all of that detail is in our guidance and will be brought out today. So some key changes there, which I'm sure most of you are already aware of, but we will obviously go into detail on those throughout the rest of the slides, which brings me to the point where I will now hand over to Jill, who I'm hoping is still there. Are you there, Jill?
I am indeed. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about the 2 assessment methods. Both have equal weighting, 50% each, official titles being Strategic Business Proposal Presentation with Questioning and Professional Discussion underpinned by Portfolio of Evidence. The Strategic Business Proposal starts with a 500-word summary, which is the title and scope really, which is submitted at Gateway and approved by ILM. That is followed up by a 4,000-word report, which is the fully developed Strategic Business Proposal, which is submitted 12 weeks after that title has been agreed and at least 2 weeks before the endpoint assessment takes place. And that's accompanied by a presentation, which is also submitted 12 weeks after Gateway, along with the report, and 2 weeks before the EPA event. The other method then, the portfolio, the professional discussion underpinned by the portfolio itself is created on programme and must be also submitted at Gateway. It's very busy, that Gateway. It's not assessed, it's used to underpin that professional discussion. What we don't mention on the slide there is that should there be a need for a resit or a retake, you know, your apprentice may fail one assessment method or the other, and if they do that, they would resit the whole assessment method. So they would resit or retake the components within that assessment method. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about that today, but it's just important to point that out. So I'm going to start with a strategic business proposal presentation with questioning, which is split into 2 components which support each other and are assessed holistically. And they are assessing the, as Joe mentioned, the knowledge, skills and behaviours have been put into groups or themes. And what this particular component is assessing is research, methodologies and analysis, and communication. And on the next slide, we've given some suggested topics there which give a flavour of the level and scope of what that strategic business proposal might look like. Now, those are ones that are in the assessment plan itself. They've been agreed by the Trailblazer group. And what we've done in our guidance is we've just added a few more. So we've given you some more ideas. So implementing virtual triage in an NHS trust, which would give a better standard of demand management. We've included one about improving public awareness of a charitable organisation's aims to increase fundraising. So we just tried to give a few more examples, but the list isn't exhaustive. You can choose your own title, you know, along with the employer and the apprentice to get their own title, but it's just to give you a flavour, really. Could I have the next slide, please, Joe? So the employer and the apprentice, and that is key, as Jo said, it's key that the employer's got a bigger role in this now. So the employer and the apprentice need to agree what the strategic business proposal will be. And the employer has to be satisfied and has to declare actually that it will meet a business need and that it is relevant to the apprentice's role. Now, the assessment plan sets out what, as a minimum, the summary needs to include. So obviously the subject and the title, but what's going to be carried out. So the scope, the business need rationale, the stakeholders that will be involved, and the anticipated time frame. So we haven't provided a template for this, but what we have done is we've included a summary in the pack, so an example summary in the pack. And what we've done, so we've gone through the introduction and the rationale and everything, and we've kind of written that out based on an example. And then in the speech bubbles, what we've tried to indicate there is where we felt there was potential to meet the KSBs, because whilst the employer and the apprentice need to agree that it meets a business need and it needs to be relevant to the apprentice's role, our job as the endpoint assessment organisation is to ask an independent endpoint assessor to review the summary and decide whether that has the potential to meet the assigned KSBs. So in the speech bubbles, we've thought where that little brief introduction might, in the fully developed proposal, meet the KSBs. So it's just kind of way to get your thinking going, really, when you're supporting those employers and apprentices to come up with the summary that will then be leading to a fully developed proposal. So once the independent endpoint assessor has reviewed it, they need to either agree or not that that has the potential to meet the assigned KSBs. And at that point, when they've confirmed that, gateway is passed. Until that, gateway requirements haven't been passed. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So once it has been agreed, the apprentice has then got, this is when the clocks start ticking, so they've then got 12 weeks to prepare the full detailed strategic business proposal and the presentation, because as I said before, they are submitted together along with the portfolio. Not the portfolio, they are submitted 12 weeks after gateway. What's important to know about the strategic business proposal itself is that it doesn't need to be fully implemented. It's not a project, it's a proposal. It's a fully worked up proposal for a project, for a strategic business project. And so it just must have been sufficiently progressed to be able to evidence S2, which is about setting strategic direction and gaining support from key stakeholders. So it means it has to be signed off, it has to be good to go, it has to be something that has been agreed is going to happen. It might not happen immediately, but it is going to happen in that person's workplace. The pass criteria is creates a high performance strategy focusing on improving efficiency, changing customer demands and trend analysis, and has support from a range of stakeholders. Another thing to note really about that strategic business proposal is that whilst we realise that, from the summary to the fully developed proposal, some things may have changed in the workplace. We may have had a pandemic, no, but some things may have changed, but the apprentice can't change fundamentally the subject, title and scope, so that needs to be seen through. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So just some detail there about preparing the proposal itself. And again, this is not really our guidance, it's the guidance from the plan. So it must be 4,000 words, that's the word limit. You do have the usual plus or minus 10%. And that word limit does include the tables and graphs and figures that are in there. but it doesn't include the references and any annexes. Now, the one annex that must be there, and hopefully the only annex really, is a mapping document. So mapping the strategic business proposal to the assigned KSBs. Now, we have provided an evidence matrix, which is a mapping document in our language, but you can, you're fully entitled to, you as an organisation, as a provider, or for the apprentice to develop their own, as long as it follows the same format. The structure for the strategic business proposal for these 4,000 words is set out in the assessment plan. But if I could have the next slide, please, Jo. What we've done in the pack is we have, following through from the example summary, we have got on the left-hand side, the left-hand column, the generic specification. So that is kind of set out in the plan. And that is, that it must have an exec summary, an introduction providing the context, the purpose and the scope, all the way down to the recommendations and the conclusions. So following on from the summary, what we've done there is we've put the KSBs in the middle, and then at the end, we have shown how the evidence, what you're writing in that section of the business proposal could meet the KSBs. So it's kind of a worked example, not fully developed. It's not the whole 4,000 words, but it's just some bits to show how those KSBs in the middle might be met within that section, and what the apprentice might be talking about within that section to help them to understand it. So hopefully that's a really useful addition for yourselves and for your apprentices, and for the employers that are helping them with this strategic business proposal, because it really does sit with them, doesn't it? Because it's in their workplace. It's a proposal that they've got to sign off in order to meet endpoint assessment requirements. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So the second component of the strategic business proposal presentation with questioning is the presentation with questioning. And the presentation is submitted, as I've said, with the strategic business proposal 12 weeks after Gateway, and Gateway only happens once we've agreed the 500-word summary. So 12 weeks from then, clock starts ticking. Obviously, the presentation focuses on the strategic business proposal. There is content that it must cover, which is set out in the assessment plan, and I'll come to in a minute. And the IEPA, the independent endpoint assessor, has 2 weeks to review it and prepare their appropriate questions for the endpoint assessment event itself. So the total time for the presentation and the questioning is 60 minutes, and there is a plus or minus 10% at the discretion of the IEPA if it's needed. Typically, that first bit will be 20 minutes, so the presentation should be 20 minutes, and the question and answers then would be 40 minutes. The assessor will ask a minimum of 6 questions, and they will be focused around the specific themes in the grading descriptors, which are in the assessment plan. So I haven't got into detail of that today. And the purpose of the questioning is for them to seek clarification about the strategic business proposal or the presentation, and also to assess in more depth and in more breadth the KSBs that have been assigned to that, and maybe that the apprentice hasn't brought out within the report or the presentation sufficiently well to maybe give them a better grade. So it's it's about clarifying, but it's about strengthening, it's about assessing that breadth and depth of the KSBs as well. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So yeah, I said I'd come to what the presentation should cover. So in that 20 minutes, the apprentice needs to talk about the intended outcomes and impacts of the strategic business proposal, how they've undertaken the strategic planning element, the rationale for the activities, the further recommendations for the future growth and progress, and how they've negotiated with and influenced stakeholders. So within the submission, they will have put in the signed declaration that it's been signed off by a senior stakeholder, and in the presentation they need to talk about how they gained that. And again, that's around that S2 that I mentioned earlier. Obviously, this assessment is online, and that will continue to be online. It's not necessarily a face-to-face assessment anymore. And as I said right at the beginning, this is assessed holistically with the strategic business proposal and the questioning, and it's an opportunity to strengthen the evidence that they've given in the strategic business proposal. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So I said questioning 40 minutes, at least 6 questions around the themes that are research, methodologies and analysis, and communication. And as I said, this is just a summary really. They will be looking to confirm their understanding of what's been presented and what was in the proposal, clarify how the apprentice has met and the KSBs that have been assigned, and look into any perceived gaps and assess the depth and breadth to possibly look at the higher grading descriptors to be able to give the apprentice the best mark that they can. Thanks, Jo. So the second assessment method then, the professional discussion underpinned by a portfolio of evidence. You can see there that again, this is assigned certain KSB groupings or themes: organisational values, finance, workforce, planning and procurement, driving change and risk management, and team working and development. So during the professional discussion, we'll be talking to the apprentice about their evidence in relation to these themes, and their responses will need to clarify and show how what they've learned has been applied to meet these KSBs. So the more you can prepare them to talk about these and their evidence freely, the better really. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So this starts with a portfolio of evidence then, which is collated on programme. So whilst the apprentice is within your grasp, I suppose, and it's submitted at Gateway. The portfolio needs to provide the context for the professional discussion because it's not assessed, but it does need to underpin it. So it is, as I said before, you know, what the professional discussion, the assessor will be talking about the evidence. And the assessment plan says 18 pieces of evidence for this one. So if you take me to the next slide, please, Jo. What do we mean by a portfolio of evidence? It's a concise collection of the apprentice's best evidence. We want to be able to see how they've applied the knowledge that they've learned, the skills that they've acquired during the learning, during the on programme, and how they've demonstrated those in their practice, how they have demonstrated through their work the behaviours that are required in the B element of the KSB. The role that they've played in creating the evidence is important in that portfolio, so we need to be able to see what they did and how they did it and who they did it with and what their aspect of it was. And obviously, the portfolio of evidence also needs to cover all the assigned KSBs. So, and that's a requirement of the assessment plan, that it is mapped to and covers all the KSBs. So the assessor will be using that portfolio to familiarise themselves with the apprentice's work so that they understand, you know, what they've tried to demonstrate through that evidence in that portfolio, to then prepare to ask questions about it in the professional discussion. And what we usually say about a portfolio of evidence is, whilst it should be gathered throughout the programme of learning, usually the best evidence comes towards the end, when they've learnt more and they've applied more and they understand the KSBs more, so they can think more broadly about how what they're doing actually demonstrates their competence, actually meets those criteria. So whilst that's not a requirement, it's just something that we say and is in our guidance, that, you know, we want pieces of evidence that will cover multiple criteria in that portfolio, because you've just got that 18 pieces. So it needs to cover more than one at least. So yeah, so that's just the holistic approach. The approach comes better, I think, towards the end of the apprenticeship programme. Something that's new to this time is that the portfolio can't include reflective accounts or self-evaluation. So that hasn't been an issue before, but IFAT have now decided that that's not something that should be included. So evidence must be demonstrated not just by the person saying this is what I've done and how I've done it, but in a different way. And we're going to come to some types of evidence in a second. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So let's talk about the lovely phrase, discrete pieces of evidence. So the apprentice may bundle together evidence that is related to, the evidence is related to each other. So we're happy to receive a small sort of bundle, if we call it that, of 2 or 3 documents, which is then classed as one discrete. So one of the 18 discrete pieces of evidence could be a bundle. But in order to be a discrete pieces of evidence, that bundle of evidence must relate to each other. So if it's, you know, a project initiation document and a presentation to the board and a witness testimony about that. And again, that demonstrates that sort of holistic approach to being able to demonstrate several criteria with one bundle of evidence. So another example might be if they've chaired a meeting and they've got the agenda and the notes and the actions and maybe a short video and a witness testimony. I know that's a lot, so that's like 5 pieces of evidence and not 2 or 3, but depending on what it is, it might then be holistically able to show sort of how they've championed projects, how they've worked collaboratively, how they've established a creative and innovative environment, and all of those are attached to driving change and risk management. It might show how they've led and influenced people, how they've taken responsibility for driving change, set clear goals and accountabilities, and that would demonstrate team working and development. So, you know, within those few pieces of evidence bundled together for the same event, for the same sort of meeting with a witness testimony, they've shown all of those things. So a really efficient and effective holistic approach. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So the types of evidence that they might use then haven't fundamentally changed. In a portfolio of evidence, we would usually expect to see a good mixture of work products, so things that have been produced in the workplace naturally. So reports that the apprentice has done, minutes of meetings they've chaired or attended and had a role in, presentations, project plans, their own performance reviews perhaps. If they've been on a programme of learning that's had assignments attached to it, some of the knowledge could be covered by academic assignments. So work products of any nature, anything goes really. We usually say have a witness testimony in there, which covers several areas and is really specific. So it really talks about how the apprentice has applied their learning, examples of when they've seen that happen, and, you know, doesn't just say, oh, they're a really good manager, they're a really good leader, but says how and when they've seen that happen. And it's a good way of capturing behaviours, because a witness from the workplace can demonstrate or articulate more easily how somebody's met the behaviours. If you use audio files, we ask that they are time-stamped. So this is really important for you to know at the beginning, I guess, which is why I'm raising it today. Timestamp it, make sure it's really clear where the evidence is, make sure the apprentice is identified and anybody else on the audio or video is identified. And we ask that it's in 5-minute chunks so that the independent endpoint assessor is not spending a lot of time looking through a 2-hour video to find that, you know, few minutes where something is demonstrated. And as I said, in the assessment plan, it does say that you must use a matrix. So the evidence must be able to be easily identified which KSBs it meets. And we have provided an example matrix there that the apprentices and you can use. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? I just put this in because the IEPA uses this model to check that the evidence is okay, that it meets the criteria. So it's good for you to know that the VAX test is used when you're reviewing your apprentices' files and giving them advice around what they can use and what's the best thing to use. So the evidence must be valid. It must have been obtained in the work environment and it must reflect the day-to-day work. Now, that's not to say that if they've been given opportunities to meet some hard to reach criteria, that's not the every day-to-day work, that can't be included, but it just means that it should generally reflect what they do on a day-to-day basis as a senior leader. It must be authentic, so it must be their own work. It must be work that they've carried out unguided, not like that they can't have a mentor or a coach or a peer to support them, but just that it's not, it's, you know, something that they have through their program of learning, they are now able to carry out independently. And it must be clear what their role is in any evidence that they've produced. Now, it must have been produced whilst they were on program, whilst they were signed up as an apprentice, and it must be sufficient to cover the KSBs, the descriptors that it's intended to cover. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? There is some very specific evidence on the brain. There is some very specific guidance in our pack about the format of the evidence that needs to be, the way it needs to be submitted. So, you know, with a header or a footer which contains their name and the date that the evidence was produced, and it must have an evidence reference number so that it's easily mapped onto the evidence matrix. Any external sources must be clearly referenced using a recognised system. So that can be footnotes, that can be Harvard, but you know, it's level 7. Any references, any external sources must be referenced. As I've said, it must be have been generated during the apprenticeship, and the role and the contribution of the apprentice must be clear. And anything around data protection or confidentiality or sensitivity, any relevant criteria and requirements must have been met. So it should have been redacted if there's anything sensitive or confidential in there. And authenticity of the evidence has been established. So that might be through witness testimony. That just is about that context, that signing off to make sure that it is the apprentice's own work. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? So as I said, complete an evidence matrix or mapping document. It's no gaps. So there must be a piece of evidence for each assigned KSB. Each piece of evidence should cover multiple KSBs. If a document is really large, so if it's a big report that a senior leader has presented, you know, when thinking about the numbering, when thinking about completing the matrix, the mapping document, maybe add the page number and the paragraph where that evidence is. You can design your own matrices for you to use with your apprentices. They can design their own, but please just make it simple. It needs to reflect the example that we've used. It needs to be really clear. And that's in the best interest of your learner. That's in the best interest of the apprentice. It's not particularly, it will help our assessors, but it's more that if it helps our assessors, it helps the apprentice too. And if there are more than 2 pieces of evidence mapped against one particular KSB, we would say consider removing one. We really do want to see the best piece of evidence, not all the evidence that they have got. Could I have the next slide, please, Joe? So, having pulled together that portfolio of evidence in that way and submitted it at Gateway, the IEPA will review that in that 2 weeks that they have at the end, and the professional discussion will be based on that evidence. So it will last for an hour, it will be online, and the independent endpoint assessor will ask a minimum of 8 open questions to prompt that discussion. And I stress that really, because the apprentice will need to be able to articulate really clearly and really easily how their evidence meets the assigned criteria, the assigned KSBs under those 4 themes. So they can have their evidence, and they really should have their evidence with them, because in that professional discussion, in that hour, although they will be prompted by that minimum of 8 questions, and there may very well be other questions that they do ask for clarification, they're really asking other questions to prompt the apprentice to talk in more detail, to draw out the best of their competence, so that they really can make sure that they cover the KSBs that they need to cover. So the apprentice should be talking more than the assessor, definitely, explaining how the KSBs, how their knowledge, skills and behaviours have developed over time during the apprenticeship programme. So talking about how that has happened and what happens, what they've applied as a result, and providing examples of how they've carried out the tasks following that learning. So those examples will be in the portfolio, which is why we say have it ready. If they've got another one in the back pocket, fine, but you know, basically the evidence in that portfolio underpins that discussion. So we're not looking for extra ones, we're just saying bring it out. We've not assessed the portfolio, we've just looked at it. So get them to bring it out, practice with them, bringing out how they meet that criteria. Because, as Joe mentioned at the beginning, the employer is the person that will be supporting the apprentice post Gateway. I guess, you know, when liaising with the employer, it's really important to make them aware of that fact, that they would probably need to be the ones that are making sure the apprentice is prepared for this discussion. So they could perhaps set up some professional discussions with the apprentices to help them to prepare and to make sure that they are ready on the day. Because when you put the apprentice through Gateway, that is kind of you signed off. That is you as the provider saying this person is ready for their endpoint assessment. So they shouldn't need that further support from you to be ready for the professional discussion. You'll have helped them with the portfolio, you'll know what's in there, you'll have practiced it on programme, but in that period between Gateway and the presentation, they shouldn't really be getting support from you any longer. So that's why we've got that there, that the employer really should ensure at the last minute, I guess, that the apprentice is prepared. Okay, that concludes the deep dive into the assessment methods. If I could just have the next slide, please, Joe, just in summary then. So the independent endpoint assessor will assess against the knowledge, skills and behaviours and the grading descriptors assigned to each assessment method. They will assign a grade. In order to get a pass, 100% of the pass descriptors must be met. And in order to get a distinction, 100% of the pass and 100% of this distinction descriptors must be met. So it's not just a few of the distinction descriptors, and also you can't move up from pass to distinction. You've got to have 100% in the first place. And then if I could just have the next slide, please, Joe. The grades from the two individual assessments are then combined to determine the apprentice's overall grade. So because each has an equal weighting towards the overall grade, as I said right at the beginning, and the overall grade can either be fail, pass or distinction. And I did say that if you fail one assessment method, then you could just resit that one assessment method, but you would need to resubmit aspects of all the components in that assessment method. But if it's pass and distinction, so which we hope all will be, you would need to get, the apprentice would need to get 2 passes to get a pass, 2 distinctions to get a distinction. So a pass and a distinction would give them just a pass, not a distinction. So the lower prevails, if you will. And obviously if you're carrying 1 fail, so you've got a fail and a distinction even, it will still be a fail until the overall grade will still be a fail until both are at least a pass. And also actually with that, if you do have apprentices that need to resit or retake, the maximum grade they can get for that component is a pass. Okay, we will take some questions, but I'm just going to hand you back to Joe now just to talk you through quickly about the support documents, just to confirm where all this information that I've just given you is captured, and the people support element for you. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Jill. So just as Jill mentioned there, we have a number of documents, really crucial documents that we have developed, and obviously Jill has talked to those documents throughout the slides. And obviously it's crucial that you access these documents. They will become your core key Bibles, if you will, for this particular assessment plan. So what we have an endpoint assessment guidance pack for our customers, so providers and employers. All of that information is there. And we also have an additional guidance pack for apprentices as well. So you have something that you can share with your apprentices that specifically talks to them as an apprentice. So you have 2 guidance packs available to you. Also with those guidance packs will be recording forms. Again, Jill has talked to these, but what you will have available to you is an evidence matrix for the strategic business proposal. Also is a declaration of authenticity for the strategic business proposal. There will also be an evidence matrix for the portfolio of evidence, again, all of which Jill has talked through, and also another declaration of authenticity for the portfolio of evidence, only required for resits and retakes. So what you have is a guidance pack and also a pack of recording forms available to you. Now, the great news is that those documents will be available from the 1st of April, which is only a couple of days away. So those documents can be found 2 places: on Walled Garden, which most of you will be very familiar with, but also all of these documents will be available on EPA Pro, which is our end-to-end platform where all of the EPA activities will take place, etc., from Gateway onwards. So the documents will be there, and when we make these live, you will all get confirmation as to where to go, etc. But they will both be available on Walled Garden and EPA Pro. And once we have developed the exemplar materials, those resources I talked to earlier on, they will also be available in both Walled Garden and EPA Pro. But the main area that all of our documents will always be, and we will primarily direct you to, will be EPA Pro. So if you do have any questions on EPA Pro, please do let us know. So as I mentioned, we have a fantastic team of people, and most of you who are probably joining us today will know these two faces. Julie Rowlett and Joe Bell are our dedicated higher education partnership managers, and I'm no doubt that you have spoken regularly. But the great thing is that both Joe and Julie have got a huge amount of experience in higher education, and are there really to really support throughout the journey. So you can rely on both Joe and Julie to really support you throughout. But also, of course, you've heard from Jill today. Jill is one of our technical advisors, who's also joined by Karen Egan. And together, Karen and Jill are there to support you through the journey, but to really help you with those technical aspects of the apprenticeship, both either the standard or the assessment plan. So you've got key people to really contact, and in the slides you'll notice obviously we've included the email addresses, so you can contact those individuals. You'll no doubt already have contact with anyone, but please do, if you have any issues, reach out to us. And I think that's the really key thing, that we will respond to any issues or questions or even celebrations, really. So it's really great that we can support you throughout the journey. But also, not to stop there, we also have EPA partnership managers, Maurice, Janice and Rebecca. They are split across the country, as you can see there. And again, Maurice, Janice and Rebecca are there to really support the EPA specific journey, whether that's the onboarding, any questions relating to EPA Pro or Gateway, uploading evidence, that whole EPA journey. Maurice, Janice and Rebecca are there to support you. And again, you've got their contact details there, dependent on where you are within the country. So please, again, reach out to any of the team. And I think what you can see there is that you have a huge breadth of support across the whole journey from start to end, and a really tremendous team and wonderful people to work with. So before we move into the questions, one final thing to say, that we have one more webinar as part of this series, so webinar 3. It's a Q&A session, and that's on the 4th of May. And we think that by the time we reach the 4th of May, you will probably have become a lot more familiar with some of the changes and may have some questions. So on the 4th of May, we will have an hour Q&A session. So please join us then for a specific question and answer sessions. For any questions that you've had unanswered, please do join us, and we will talk through any other questions that you still have. Okay, so that brings us to the last part. But I can see that Jill has been very kindly answering some of the questions as they've been coming in. So Jill, I'm thinking you might be a good person just to raise a couple of points just to kick us off, because I think you've answered some key questions. And I think there is just an amendment that we need to make to the slides. So Jill, do you want to just pick up and just share some of the questions that we've had and the answers to those?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Joe. Morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. Hope what Jill and Joe have shared with you so far has been helpful. Do keep the questions coming. As Joe's just mentioned, there are plenty of us here to provide the answers and support you through this process. So a couple of questions that have come through. One of them is about how quickly we will respond when you send through the strategic business proposal summary. Our plan is that the independent assessor should respond within 3 working days once the summary has been assigned to them. So you'll upload that summary at Gateway onto EPA Pro. One of our EPA team will assign it to the IEPA, and then they should respond within 3 working days. So overall, I would expect you to get a response within a week. Hopefully the guidance we're preparing for you will help you get this right first time. As Jill mentioned, we want to be clear as we can be that there's the potential that the apprentice will be able to evidence those KSBs. So what we've done is put one example in the pack, and we're also working on some other examples for you, perhaps with slightly more borderline evidence, so you can see what not quite there would look like. So hopefully those will help you, and we'll be sharing those with you over the next few weeks. Then the next question is an apology from us, actually. We had an error on one of the slides where we've said that the word count included tables and graphs, and actually it's incorrect. They are excluded from the word count. Please be assured, though, that the EPA pack we have produced is correct. It's just the slide that was incorrect. We will update the slides before we share those with you over the next few days. Then moving on to the next question. Professional discussion. I think Jill mentioned this, but just to be clear, whilst the portfolio of evidence is really important to help the apprentice prepare, they may well come up with new evidence after they've submitted the portfolio, and it's perfectly acceptable for them to include that in the professional discussion and enhance the answers that they're giving. Okay, our next question we've got is about EPA Pro. Can we explain what this is? So this is our online platform. It's a one-stop shop for registering, uploading information, monitoring the progress of the apprentice through the EPA process. Joe, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about that.
No, I think that's a good summary, but just to reiterate, it is our dedicated platform that you will utilize for the whole EPA journey. So as Jill mentioned there, it's for you to upload evidence to track progress, etc. The best contacts will be our EPA partnership managers, as mentioned in the previous slide. Or of course, if you're already talking with Joe or Julie, they'll be able to support you with ensuring that you have access to EPA Pro or get access to EPA Pro. But it is our dedicated platform that will support you throughout. And it really is a fantastic platform because it gives you full visibility of progress. So you can have a lot of confidence in that platform to really ensure that you can track the full journey, because of course that EPA journey is up to 5 months, and so therefore it's really important that you're able to track and monitor, and EPA Pro allows you to do that. So if you've not had access, please reach out to either Joe or Julie or any of our EPA partnership managers, and they'll be able to support you, Carol. But I hope that helps. Just give a bit of a summary on EPA Pro. But I'm conscious now, actually, Jill, we are 29 minutes. Oh, thank you, Carol. 29 minutes. So that really, the hour has just vanished. So really, I think that brings us to an end. Any final questions that suddenly come through, we will add to the FAQs, but I think we've managed to actually answer most of those questions live, and I really think that thanks to Jill for that. Thank you, Jill, for answering those live as we've been going on. Yes.
Can I just say there is one question about if an apprentice takes a break in learning. I think that means break in learning, and there are no longer programs running on the old standard. It's come from Neil. Can they come back on a program mapped to the new standard? So that's just one question that's outstanding that I can see in the pane.
Good shout. Jill, do you feel happy answering that one before we wrap up?
Yeah, okay, so there isn't an opportunity to switch from one program to the other. So if someone has signed up to the old apprenticeship standard with the master's degree embedded within it as a mandatory qualification, then that is where they would need to remain when they come back from the break in learning, is my understanding.
Yes, I would agree with that, Jill. Because obviously there are so many changes, both standard and assessment plan, and obviously apprentices can't switch, and so therefore they would need to remain on the current one or the previous one, and see that through. But again, if you need any further support on that, then do reach out to us, and we can always kind of talk more. But thank you, Jill, for finding that last question. I missed that one, so thank you for that. So just a last one to say, stay in touch. We've got a number of different social channels to stay in touch, but also we have a dedicated preference center. So if you haven't signed up to our preference center, where you can get specific communications direct to your inbox, then please do sign up to that. We'll add information to our follow-up comms. But just really a final thank you to absolutely everybody for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for listening to all of that detail. And just a final huge thank you to both Jill Hanson and Jill Harper for all of their tremendous work in all of the development over the last few weeks, but also for presenting today some really high value information there for you, which we really hope helps you transition to the new standard and the new assessment plan. But please don't stop asking your questions. Reach out to any of those contacts that we shared with you today, and we will be there to help and support you throughout the journey. But thanks once again. Have a wonderful day. The sun is shining still, and we will hopefully see you at webinar 3 in May. Thanks again, everyone.